Welcome everybody to the Steven Cimino Says Boom Show, issue 40. Oh boy.
Boom!
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Always looking good, always feeling good. We're with Baby Thanos over here, Steve. And then we got Niall down below with the Pop XP. Niall, what's going on? What's happening today? Issue 40, my friend.
Issue 40. You guys are climbing up there. We're getting there. We're maturing. We're maturing here. But everyone, as you know the drill. Look below, click that subscribe button, and make sure to smash that bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content like this episode tonight. We've got some amazing guests. So, gentlemen, take the wheel and let's rock and roll.
Okay. Steve brought this all to my attention. We've had a guest that I met a few years prior, but kind of forgot about her for a little while. And then, Steve, why don't you talk about what's going to happen today and some special guests that we're going to have on, because this is cool. Because I just want to say, when you presented her to me, I said, oh my God, I remembered her from the past. And now she's now in the present. And now we got the future. A lot of big things happen in the future. So tell me, Steve, what's going on?
Well, funny enough, when I was in New York for the comic convention, went to a party at night, and Catherine Gruenwald happened to be there, and I hadn't seen her since 1996 at the San Diego, where we had the memorial for Mark Gruenwald. And we got involved in a conversation, and she was telling me all these things that she was doing. And I was like, wow, she's still right there. And then I said, by the way, things have changed, and I'm on a podcast. And we are doing a lot of things. And so if you are available, I would love to have you come on. And she was like, just tell me who I need to get in contact with. Boom, 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 we'll do it. And I said, I'm being very serious. I said, you will get contacted. I said, this isn't some sort of weird little story, some weird guy. And boom, I texted John, bang, bang. And as you know, here on the Steven Cimino podcast, things get done. And so we are very fortunate to have Catherine with us tonight, and we are going to have a great conversation in regards to the late, great Mark Gruenwald.
And you know what's funny? First off, when you said that, I saw the smile on Niall's face. All he's thinking of more subscribers. That's what he's thinking of. We're going to get more subscribers.
Let it grow, baby. It's like a chia pet. Let's keep putting water on it.
And I want to say, from back then, when I first met Catherine, I don't know if she remembers, but I was with my friend Joe Carmagna. We were at Terrificon. I'm thinking back in like 2017. I could be wrong, but I was my boy Joe Carmagna, he's a writer and letterer for Marvel, and I was acting all crazy at that time, and I was jumping on top of Joe. And she looks at me because she was right beside us, and she goes, Mark would have really liked you. And I was like, who's Mark? And she was like, Mark Gruenwald. And then we started talking, and I was like, wow. So I said, I guess Mark was a pretty eccentric guy himself. Ooh. And that's where we're going to get into the weeds. And also, not just Catherine is going to be here, but we also have her producer here, Dan Hort, that he's going to come out, and we'll get their full story, what they're all doing now. And I don't know, baby Thanos, what should we do? Should we bring him in?
Let's get this show rolling. Boom.
Boom. We're here.
Welcome.
Hello.
Jeez. Oh, I remember that time in Terrificon, John. That wow. I wanted whatever you were on.
We all do.
It was fun.
I
It
was
was
sitting next to Jerry Ordaway.
yes.
And right, and I was talking to him about Omniverse and about the episode that he was writing for the Omniverse fictional reality mag that Mark was doing, and I was having a serious conversation with him. And you were over there just riffing. It was great. It was such a yin and yang. But I was doing the astrograph in the different iteration then. So I was stamping things, and Mitch had me over there in the corner because he thought it was too creepy. With those ashes, I was like the wacky widow. So I felt like I'd met my match with you.
It's funny you say that. It's funny you say that because he thought it was creepy. That's why I was stuck in the corner too with Joe. So so you were in perfect company. But what's funny is how Jerry Ordway is such a quiet, calm guy. So and with me, and even Joe is too. So me and you were the two eccentric people there, and we kind of connected. Do you remember?
Right. And Dan with me, and also Peter Sanderson was there.
Yes,
so,
Peter was there.
Right.
That's
so
right.
it was kind of a reunion of sorts, but it was I felt like I was ostracized because I didn't feel it was creepy to have Mark's ashes there, but he, it has really kind of led me to the iteration of the astrograph that I showed you, Steve, that we just came out with, because it's neat. You can see him, he's in the resin, you can see the ash, and you can see the autograph. And but it's not like you're spraying him and then you have to wait for it to dry and then it'll flake off, and it's just too messy. This is much more probably the way Mark would like it too. It's got a system to it.
So Catherine, like, just to catch people up on what you're talking about, first we'll say that when Steve introduced you back to me, and he was saying, "Oh, we got to get Catherine on," and I was like, "Oh my God, I remember her," and all that stuff. So, and he's telling me a little about what you're doing. So, Steve, why don't you present this and what how we should start this from the beginnings?
Yes, I think for all of our subscribers and people who are watching coming in here, they may be slightly confused. They might be like, "Oh, what's going on?" And again, as part of this show, that's also I love to be educational, and I always want to educate people about the greats. Unfortunately, we're talking about Mark Gruenwald today. Mark Gruenwald passed so early. He passed in 1996, and it's to me, it's unbelievable that he passed so early, because he would have thrived in this environment, and he would be able to speak to us and to everyone, and people go, wow. But the thing is, yes, Mark passed away in 1996, but his footprint is immense. It's massive. And so whenever I'm doing a sale or I'm talking about product and I get into the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, Mark Gruenwald's name comes up again and again and again. So for me, I'm always into this educational mode when someone talks about, oh, did you remember that? Like, what was it called? The Handbook of the Marvel Universe? I'm like, let me tell you about the handbook. Okay. I said, do you want to know how that exists? Okay. And they're like, hey, man, there was this great one on Captain America. Let me tell you about Captain America. Okay. So I'm very passionate about Mark's work. I don't know whether I've met anyone as passionate about Mark's work as me, especially his Quasar, which I probably read 1 billion times again and again and again and again. Yeah. And people are like, hey, Steve. And I'm like, did you read Quasar? And they're like, no, we're reading it now. And they're like, oh, okay, wow, I never met anyone as forceful as you. So, obviously, Mark has a lot of material out there. And also, he has a lot of editorials out there, stuff that he wrote, especially in Marvel Age, Mark's Remarks, where he would write. So if you go through those issues of Marvel Age, you're going to get a sense of who he was, where he was coming from. However, the next best thing is to talk to someone that knew him, of course, 100%, someone that was joined with him and someone that knew stuff that we don't know, something, and you know, when he would have conversations, maybe he had low points, maybe he had high points. So that's where I'm very honored that we have Catherine here. Catherine was with Mark for a while, and we're going to be able to get into some weeds and maybe discover some stuff that people, you're not going to get in a Marvel Age editorial. We're going to get into some great stuff. And that brings us up to speed, I think, where we are right now.
Yeah, and so let's start off first, Catherine. I like to know the beginnings. How did you meet Mark? I think that would be kind of cool. How did it blossom into a relationship?
Yeah, well, I had a career as a plus size model in the 80s and 90s. So I was one of the first women to sign with Ford and be a plus size model. So we always used to get these kind of weird requests for big girls.
Okay.
And one of them was Marvel. They were hiring She-Hulk for the conventions because there were no cosplayers in those days. They hired models and they had an outfit for you and you wore it and they paid you, and it was, you know, you didn't have to know anything about the character. You just had to look like her. So I came down and they showed me this picture of, I thought I was looking at Bev Francis should have been in my place instead of me.
The bodybuilder. Yep.
Yes.
Right. I mean, real steroided out. So I did my best at posing, and but he made a comment to me that he thought that I would have been better for the Enchantress. And I was like, oh, really? Well, let me check into who that is. You know, I didn't know who she was. And when he said that, it was like, is that a comic book guy's pickup line or what?
It is.
Like a cool character, but I mean, she looked like freaking Jerry Hall with, you know, it was like the biggest compliment somebody could pay you, right? So we started talking, and then he said, you know, he had a comedy group, I had a comedy group, and I said, you know, my mom was one of those people that she really didn't think that the comics were. She wanted you to read books, not comic books, you know.
Right.
And my brother and I didn't have a good relationship, so I wasn't pulled into it like a lot of girls were with their brothers, telling them the ropes and telling them what they were reading. And I know he read comic books, but you know, we didn't have a good relationship like that where he was spilling the beans about that. So I really did not have the kind of background in comics that somebody like Mark probably I could never match him. And he said, that's exactly what I wanted. Because I was in fashion. I had my own career and I wasn't trying to use Mark's status to elevate mine, you know, and, you know, get a job or something like that. It would have been too much overlap. So it actually worked out, and he would come to all of my shows, all my fashion shows, and he'd be drawing in the with his illustration pad, because he was a pretty good illustrator. Besides being a great editor, he was a pretty doggone good sketch artist. And he said, oh, I had at least 4 or 5 ideas from your fashion show for new character costumes. So it was kind of funny that we kind of united like that. But that's how it happened. And then he said, maybe you would like to go, out sometime. And I said, well, I really don't date people that I'm working for. And he said, well, you don't have the job. I said, I like this guy. This guy is a really, like a whip snap. He wasn't intimidated by me or, anything like that. So I called him up, and we started to see each other. And I mean, he is one of the most romantic and one of the most special people that I've ever met, in terms of just how he his belief in an institution, because he believed in the institution of marriage. He believed in the institution of America. He wrote for Captain America. He believed in institutions, and I think he had this idealized sense of what they should be. And his parents were perfect parents for his mentality and for the type of person he was. When he took me back home to because we started dating very, very quickly, and we were inseparable. I mean, inseparable. I was really so taken by this guy, and he was writing me poems and
Wow.
sketching.
Catherine, one quick thing. What year are we talking about? What year did you meet him?
90.
1990? Okay.
Yeah. And then we got engaged in February of 92. So I met him at the end of 90, and then January we started to go out because we kind of let the holidays go, and then we started to date. And then I remember on February 14th, he sent me roses, and Bob Harris delivered them. He had Bob Harris deliver the roses. And I said, you're some delivery boy here. But, it was just a lighthearted thing that was going on at Marvel. And they were so happy that Mark was happy. I didn't realize what a dark place he had come out of, because Belinda was his first wife, and that ended. And then Sarah was the baby that came from that whole union. They tried to save their marriage. He got married because John Lennon was assassinated, and he said, "Life's too short. I need to get married." And so he married Belinda, but it was just totally the wrong person. And I'm so sorry that she stressed him out so much for those 10 years. And then his girlfriend, Jan, had cancer. So he was with her for 3 years. So he was in a very dark place. And I think some of the things he was writing in Quasar, and that reflected that kind of dark place that he was at. And then, I came along, and I was very lighthearted and fun. And I didn't really care that I didn't know comics. He knew how to pull you in on whatever level you were at, and use your skills, and use my comedic writing background, use whatever background I had. He made you fit, and he did this to everybody, no matter if you worked in Marvel or if you were in his life. He found a place for you that was suitable to your skill set, that you could excel, and you could have just a blast. I mean, he was just a blast to be around, and he's never had a shortage of ideas. What's today going to be? He had it all mapped out in his head. He probably had so many different that he was dealing with in terms of like his work life, and then his parents were not doing all that well. His father had Lyme's disease. He got Lyme's disease in 1978. So he was in a wheelchair, it was very, very serious. And so Mark always knew to hope for the best, expect the worst, but hope for the best. But that's part of his ability to plan, and why he wanted to have the will that said that he wanted his ashes put into a comic, because he wouldn't marry me until we did our wills. He would not marry me until we did our wills. So we had to get all the wills in place. And I'm listening to him read this will and saying, I want to be cremated and my ashes put into a comic book. And I'm like, whatever. Never realizing that 3 years and 10 months later, I'd be doing that very thing. So we put him into Squadron Supreme. Marvel cooperated. I just saw Bob Harris the other day, and I thanked him again for being so cooperative with that weird request. But he made sure that happened, and everyone conspired to have Mark's final wishes. And that's kind of like what I'm still at, as I call myself his legacy advocate. So I'm always looking for ways to creatively, authentically, and interestingly and engagingly his memory alive, because it's got to always be interesting. You said it best, Steve. You know, he was deep, and he was very, very deep, but he was very serious and silly at the same time. So you had to be as lighthearted as you were serious and smart and academically inclined. But he took his comedy very, very seriously. And I said he was just such a perfect pairing of opposites, like, he could be one thing in him, and he was a true Gemini in that respect. He didn't believe in astrology. He believed in astronomy, but he didn't believe in astrology. But I said, if there was a true Gemini, you're it.
It's funny you say that. It's funny you say
sides.
that about. It's funny you say that about his writing being too deep and I mean being deep and funny and lighthearted and then serious. Because when I was young and reading comics at this time, I didn't know he was writing comics, but I knew his writings because I would always read his writings, and I'm like, yeah, this guy's fun. Like it captivated me too. Like, he was keeping the traditions of like what Stan started about how they captivated the reader, and they brought
Yeah.
you into this world of like you're part of it. That Stan's genius. And then reading Mark, he was like a new breath of fresh air because I was kind of just getting my run into the comics at that time, and then it was like opening up other stuff like the Marvel Universe or the Captain America. I'm like, oh, he's a writer too, because I didn't know he was also writing the comic books, because my first impressions of him were his writings and his little sketch of himself, and he always had the little his little caricature, and that's how I always knew him. And so when I finally saw his picture in the comic, I'm like, yeah, he looks just like the little drawing. I was learning. It was a fun time of learning this experience. But that was my experience with Mark. And it's funny you said that, because that's exactly what I felt,
Right.
from his writing.
Well, I would also like to expound a little bit further on just how things seem to happen, and it seems to be destiny. Now, of course, we all know Roy Thomas, and Roy Thomas was a super fan that was writing about stuff and then ended up working at Marvel. Well, I think in terms, Mark Gruenwald was perhaps an even more fanatical fan than Roy. I really do think that Mark was at a level that had never been seen before, and his writing was so complex and deep. And people are like, well, you're just writing about comics, right? But I could just imagine him looking at you going, excuse me, I'm working on something very important here. So when I was in England, I heard this myth, this incredible rumor that there was a little magazine called Omniverse. And I was like, oh, what's that?
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, it's only available in America. You're never going to get it here. And it's Mark Gruenwald, and it's, just 2 years before he hit Marvel, he wrote this thing, it's continuity and la, la, la. And I was like, oh, I'm going to find that. Where is Omniverse? Like enough, as soon as I came to the States, as soon as I went to a proper convention, I was like, guys, have you ever heard of something called Omniverse? And they're like, oh, well, is that over? I picked up both copies of the Omniverse, and I read them through and through, and I was just astonished by the level of depth and what he was going into. Now, of course, I found out later on that on the strength of his Omniverse work, he was hired to work for Marvel. And so he basically starts working at Marvel 1979. And the magic of someone that's that deep into the universe and knows everything. And it's like, okay, I have something to add. I have something to add. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. So when I think of Mark, the three main projects, and I'm sure Catherine will back me up on this. The three main projects that he got to do, of course, he got to write his Captain America. He got to write his Squadron Supreme, a masterpiece, and he got to write Quasar, which is a very personal book. Those three things will last forever, and he got to do it. Of course, he became an editor at Marvel and stuff like that. But he is a super fan that published something outside of the industry, got noticed, got into the industry, and then when the massive projects were like, oh, and Jim Shooter's like, oh, well, I don't know who's Mark, come on in. Do you have any ideas, Mark? And Mark's like, bah! The ball's rolling. He's got this energy. He's doing 17-hour days. You know, I swear no one else in the world could have done it. So, Catherine, is there anything there that I said that you can expound on further? Am I on the money right there?
Yeah, and he it wasn't an easy entree into the business, because just because you're a fan, you have to work for it. And that's what he said. He said that the business does not owe you a career. You have to, he doesn't believe in luck. You had to, work hard and get yourself where you needed to get to. And he actually said that having that, his work, that he actually biked around town, because he and I talked about how we biked around New York during those days. But he would bike around and he would take his entire portfolio on his back while he was biking. And one time a bus clipped him and actually dragged him underneath the bus, and he was getting dragged. He was holding onto the bumper and getting dragged, and the portfolio saved him.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, that's got to be the weirdest. I mean, only Mark could survive something like that, because he was very coordinated and agile. I mean, anybody else would have, I don't know, he had kept his wits about him. But he said, it was double fold, because that portfolio actually allowed him to show his work to somebody like Schuller. But then it really did save his life.
Wow. Yeah, that's
And it
cool.
was like, it was just a funny little anecdote that stuck in my head, because I'm always, when I'm biking, I watch those metal things that are on buses.
Mhm.
You can catch your jacket on them, and it'll rip, it'll send you flying, and it did. So I thought, and that whole, when I read Omniverse, I realized that I was married to like the equivalent of Buckminster Fuller here. I mean, he went so deep, and the four corners of the earth, and Ragn and Asgard, and the mythology, as well as the philosophy, as well as the timeline. And it was like,
Oh, he worked out the Kang timeline.
right.
Yep. Yep.
I know. And he had all these flow charts. He loved doing flow charts. And he would do a flow chart at the drop of a hat, or a character wheel. He could do a character wheel and a flow chart at the drop of a hat. And he was very, very very organized. He was very balanced, right brain and left brain. So it wasn't like he was just a creative with no sense of how to do organization or how to lead people. Or, I mean, he was very balanced in that respect. And I just think that his childhood was such that his parents were perfect. Way for him to his father was a fan. He got Mark extremely interested at a very early age. And his mother was like a perfect June Lockhart type of 50s, 60s mom, where she was, anything Mark wanted to do, she would facilitate it, have pizza parties. The neighborhood kids were all Justice League of America advocates, and she would have them over for pizza. And they were 18 years old when they had Mark, so they were so young that they themselves were teenagers. And Mark was just a few years older basically than them, but he was just so taken by his upbringing. And Oshkosh, he was so proud to take me around to where he got his Boy Scout badge, where he got his his job at the record store. And he just loved being from Oshkosh. It wasn't anything that he was ashamed of. He thought he was very proud of his Midwestern roots. And I think it helped him understand the essence of Captain America, but at the same time not to be such a rah patriot and blinded by my government, right or wrong. He really knew how to balance that, Americana that he was raised in, with the white picket fence. I have a painting of him as Superman and Batman as the Justice League as a little boy in front of a white picket fence. I mean, that's the kind of environment that Oshkosh was in those days. It was idyllic. And so it was a perfect substrate for his upbringing and his ability to have that bullpen be such a rich sandbox of everyone contributing, and everybody's skill sets getting taken advantage of and being used properly. I saw storyboards he did when he was 5, little cartoons, crayon, and comics was everything to him. He said it was everything. Everything was tax deductible. It was just everything. Comics was the be all and end all, and he could filter everything he went to, even my fashion shows. He could apply to comics. Everything led back to his profession.
Now, Catherine, we had a brief conversation a couple of weeks ago in New York, and you did mention that his real comic love is something that he never actually got to work on, because he, according to Mark Waid, is one of the biggest experts on the Justice League of America that there has ever been. Someone that read those books left, right, and center. And I think maybe at some point was thinking that he was going to end up working at DC. Maybe he could write the Justice League, but he never got there. But maybe you can expound a little bit on his love for the JLA.
Yeah. It was everything to him as a kid, and he understood it right. And I think him getting to work on Squadron Supreme was, the Justice League of America, that was a huge coup for him, and he was able to do it in such a way, for Marvel that he would have probably done it in DC. But that's one of the reasons why when I make appearances, I dress up as Wonder Woman, because that was his first crush. He said his first crush was Wonder Woman. So, Justice League was something that hooked him as a kid. So I think when he got a chance to really get into the inner workings and do those deep stories, and I think the Watchmen and all that, Squadron Supreme was one of the things he was the most proud of, and that was what they put his ashes in, because it was his best-selling novel. Quasar did not do as well as he had hoped, because that was something he absolutely loved too. He named Wendell after his brother-in-law. Everything was tied into the way that was Mark. Quasar was more Mark than anything. But I don't think the sales did did so well that but it didn't affect him. He didn't, he didn't think, oh, what the heck, he gave it his all, and he didn't ever worry about the sales. You didn't worry about those kind of things. In fact, when they were trying to make everybody think of new ideas for merchandising, he says, that's not the way you write comics. You don't write them with merchandising ideas in mind. He had to evolve into those. But I think that one of the things I appreciate most now is meeting people who have been his fans and realize how smart and how deep they all are, and they share that love of comics and love of bigger ideas and such depth and breadth of humanity and all the academic qualities that he shared. When I meet his fans, he said, I don't have many fans, but the ones I have really get me. You guys really get him, and I thought it's such a wonderful thing to witness from, the sidelines, just to see how he never ran out of ideas. In fact, he would come up with some really stinkers and he would write them down. And I said, they're going to groan at those, Mark. He said, it doesn't matter. It'll springboard them to start thinking. So he said, you have to always be, thinking up ideas and coming up with new concepts, and he'd come running out of the study at night and say, I've done something no one's done in comics before. And he was, that just was something that he just loved. He knew comics so well, and he knew them so well that he knew exactly what was missing and what hadn't been done. And it was delightful to watch him work, and how could I not be supportive of someone like that? I never thought I was number two either. Like, I'm sure Belinda, was always, at him because he didn't have enough quote unquote time for her. You have to incorporate yourself into Mark's psyche, and he'll make time for you because you are in his life and part of his, gestalt, really. You don't wait. He doesn't separate things out as like, now I'll have time for her and this will be different from the comic book world. It's all part of it, and you have to understand that he loves you enough to include you in that.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because when his writings are like a passion, and he was one of those guys that lived and breathed it. That's why I think about some of the guys that have already passed on, that if they knew how it was today, the fanaticism and all that stuff, he would appreciate his, like, that appreciates his work, and like all of them. Like, when I talked to Roy about it too, it's like it's he can't believe, like, they can't, it's still like how huge it is. We just had Steve Englehart on, and he said the same thing. It's like they created, think about this, the greatest movie franchise in the history of the world. Like, literally, that's how big all this stuff was. And people like him who had that crazy passion, it would be so refreshing to see what it really evolved into. And he would have been something like, yeah, I always knew it would be this way, because he knew and all that stuff. So, I mean, that's why we do this. It's also like a celebration of a lot of those guys that have passed on. And we like people to know who they were and what they really done, because, like, once again, anybody going out there, you got to read that Squadron Supreme. I mean, it's almost like his essence. It literally is. His essence is in there. But I mean, like, he put his heart and soul. Now, Dan, let me ask you a question. Obviously, you're a big supporter too of Mark. Tell me how you got involved with Catherine and this whole thing. Let's see what you have to say. What about Mark can you tell about to us?
Well, that's actually two different questions. So I'll answer the second one first, because there's a couple corrections for you there, Steve. Mark actually, coming out of Omniverse, worked for DC Comics. The first job he got out of Omniverse was on Amazing World of DC Comics, which was DC's fanzine for their very similar to Omniverse in these kind of heavy duty breakdowns, large kind of analysis never before seen, which you did say, which I think is absolutely so, is that you couldn't have the world cinematically that you have without the granular breakdown that Mark put together. Listen, I'm a big fan of Quasar too, but I'm not putting it on there before I'm getting Marvel Universe or Contest of the Champions on my all-time Gru list. And both of those also are remarkably innovative and so important in terms of what we now see. And so in terms of my fandom, and I think this is something that Catherine and I have found over the last several years, where we've been making the con circuit again and talking Gru to everybody, is, fans of a certain age, those of us that were reading in the in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, that crowd, the 50s to the 60s, that bunch there. There's a lot of us.
Maybe a little gray. Just a little gray.
Right, a little gray, exactly right. But we let our beards grow out a little bit, just so that we're bespoke, just like all the other hipsters. But that it's actually was incredibly impactful. In general, we can all, I think, agree. And listen, don't get me wrong. I love DC, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, no doubt, it's all great. But when we were kids, it was really Marvel. There's really no way around that. That Marvel was having the moment. The writing there was just better. The characters were fresher. Everything just seemed to be happening. And so now you have really several generations of fans that have come into their own of a certain age that are rabidly interested in Marvel. And so Mark, Kat likes to tell the story of, Stan used to call him the heart and soul of Marvel Comics. And I think that there's a lot to that. We spent a lot of time, paneling and talking, and we're very biased, but I actually don't think that it's, made up. That I think that the work that Mark did in terms of the analysis, the Marvel universe, the gamification, if you will, of these characters and the codification of their secret identities and their histories and all this stuff was, unbelievably important and innovative. When you start to look at role-playing games and video games, and by the way, I think one of the things that has worked so well for the MCU was their ability to tie it all together, to have these movies working in tandem with each other, have the storylines go together, and then of course to see them all on screen together in the Avengers movie was just so much fun. I really believe that Mark's work was maybe the single most important aspect of those things and allowed it to happen, which is really a pretty big accomplishment, quite frankly, And so, to me, listen, I was a Captain America guy. I was always a big Captain America guy. Steve Englehart, gotta love it. That those were all incredibly good books. I think Captain America is debatably the greatest fictional character ever. There's some other people you could throw out there, but I think Captain America, you can make an argument pretty easily. Kat, addressed it a little bit earlier. One of the things that I think everybody loves about him is he wasn't really a rah for the government. He was really the American dream, which I think was important nuance that certainly came in, in the Englehart Buscema era of Captain America. But Mark's arc with the Captain and Cap No More and all that really hammered it home. I think it became canon at that point that suddenly, that this guy wasn't an apologist at all, that he was an incredibly complex character, and that he would, that there was a lot going on there. So again, I really think, and again, I'm biased. We're fans over here, but the reality of it is I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that work was very, very important, if not, as I say, the single most important thing. Because again, I would maintain that contemporary comic books really enjoy the benefit of that structure, that is canon history. That one of the things that everybody knows that separates Marvel from DC, besides about 40 years of stories, is that all the Marvel guys were in New York. They were all kind of functioning in this universe, this very, this singular universe. Whereas the DC characters were always kind of all over the place. This story, they didn't really necessarily train all the time. And in fairness to DC, some of that is just because they were much, much older, and as if anybody was writing comic books like that in the 1950s. But nevertheless, again, the codification of it all, that then led to, again, almost a stratomatic level of, what their powers were. I remember the first time I saw Marvel Universe, I was just a kid. It came out in the floppy, and it was mind-bending. That it was kind of like, oh my God, here's, they had the picture, they had the breakdown of all these different kinds of things about them, a little bit of an origin, a little bit, then they're breaking down their equipment and what they were doing. You love that kind of stuff. And Mark was the man for that, And I'll say this, which is also really interesting and is not as maybe not as exciting as, oh, wow, giving everybody origins and tying everything together. Somewhere in the background, Marvel Comics as a business was also organizing and, quantifying what was going on in what of course became a corporate maneuver that not just in comic books, but you saw all over the place, where there was, you know, a real changing of systems, a real organization, where once the Marvel way was a much more free-formed kind of everybody working around and, you know, whatever, doing whatever they want to some degree. There became a need for organization internally. And Mark was a huge part of that, that somewhere with his left hand, he was writing all this stuff and organizing all this stuff. And on the other side, he was knee deep in the corporate structure and organizing the business operations of Marvel Comics. There aren't that many guys that can, you know, do that, you know, kind of left brain, right brain thing and really manage it and be loved by everybody. We've never met, I mean, truly, we've never met anybody that said anything. I'm waiting to find them. And in fact, I keep sort of poking, thinking somebody will tell a story at least once where Mark lost his temper or said something nasty. Hasn't happened yet. We have not encountered anybody that hasn't been rabidly, I love this guy. He was the greatest guy. What a nice guy. You know, I mean, I was just today over at the continuity offices talking to Chris Adams, and, you know, they're DC people. I mean, obviously Neil did a lot of stuff, but they're DC people. And she said, oh my God, everybody loved Mark. He was just one of those guys.
I got to admit.
Also is interesting, and it segues into something that Catherine said about fans. One of Mark's fans happens to be one of the biggest movers and shakers in this industry right now, Mr. Robert Kirkman.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was at a comic shop a couple of years ago, and I saw this publication, and it was the official handbook of the Invincible Universe. And I looked at it, and I was like, well, wait a minute. That's exactly the same. And I opened it up, and at first I was pissed, because I was like, you thief. And I opened it up, but on the inside, he's got Peter Sanderson. He's got this thing, and he loves Mark Gruenwald, and he loved what he did, and he's introducing this format, and he's using his name, and it says Inspiration Mark Gruenwald. So there's hundreds of thousands of other fresh, new, young minds that are opening up this book and seeing Mark Gruenwald's name. I love that. That's a super fan that went off and made his mark. And I'm telling you right now, Invincible is the most important superhero book in the world right now. There's nothing from Marvel or DC matching it. And he loves Mark. And to have that format, when I was looking through the format, I was like, oh, I'm not even an Invincible maniac. I have those books. I have them. And I flick through and I'm like, oh, wow, look, the way he did it. So there's love right there. And I think it goes right into what Catherine was saying about fans. But I wanted to move on a little bit further and maybe get into, you know, more of some serious stuff. Now, obviously, you met him in 1990. So when you met him in 1990, he was basically, he was quite a power within Marvel, basically, also in an editorial position, had a lot of power. He was writing his books. Marvel was about to enter this new phase where they were going to explode. The speculator boom was going to hit. The whole universe was going to become massive. And he was involved in all of those huge stories. You were there with him when, you know, we went through the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, and all that sort of stuff. And you were also there when we had that editorial change in 1995, which to me signaled the end of my Marvel universe. So I'm really intrigued about what was Mark's frame of mind with this change going on?
He wasn't very happy with the way things were coming down in those days. He used to say, I have to go upstairs and hand them a line of happy horse shit. And, you know, he felt the squeeze. He started taking screenwriting classes, and he would take whomever, you know, what editors wanted to take them with him. But he and I went to screenwriting classes together because I feel like he didn't really know what was going to be next for him. He was but he had a really kind of not fatalistic approach, but he said it's almost like que sera, que sera. He knew that he would be able to carve a place for himself out, and that the work he had done he would be able to build on. And that's one of the things that I'm so glad that I stayed in New York and hung in there for the last 27 years since he's been gone, and made some things happen and didn't give up, because he didn't give up either. And he was trying, he had to fire 25 people who he had trained since they were little kids. Practically, they came to Marvel in their late teens, interns. And he spent time with, Jack Morelli, and, coddled them. And even Mike Carlin was not really sure what he was going to be doing. Howard Mackey, he took these people and really infused. He gave them a career. I mean, a lot of people have said that what Mark had taught them, they were able to use in other jobs that they had afterwards too. But he was his father. And if you wanted to get an A, you had a contract for that. A B, you had a contract for that. A C, you had a contract for that. So he realized that, I think Jim Salicrup said that when Jim left, they suddenly realized, how could Jim Salicrup leave? Don't we have a contract with him? They had to start making contracts for people. I mean, Dan's point, there was a big system in Marvel when Mark first came there. So he was able to build it and step back and see the work he had done. And I'm thinking that, he had pictures of these people on his wall. And I think that he was, very despondent with the kind of people that Perlman was hiring, and the people that were, he made this comment about Dick Rogers, who came in and I think his claim to fame was he worked for Mars and he did the colored M&Ms campaign. So he never really read comic books the way he wanted people who they would hire and give those lofty positions to. And I think he saw that, and Marvel Mark thought that Marvel was going downhill in the late 80s, and it was not what he knew what it was when he was a kid. And you harken back to those days when you're more of a purist about it. But I think he was very despondent with how things were going at Marvel. But he always thought that he could rally, and he could put his cape and tights on, so to speak, and make everyone happy and make up something to do. And it was kind of sad, because it really took its toll on him. He was just really, he had a free floating depression, and it would really get him down, and he didn't know it would just blindside him. And I think his work, kind of masked that, because he was so happy with the things that he was coming up with. But he could not, and he was happy with the way he was able to be in the office too, because it was all pervasive and a whole 360 experience for him, because he wasn't separate from the characters who he was working with were characters in his universe. The fans were important to him. Everything mattered to him on all levels. And he loved working with Tom DeFalco. He appreciated all of everyone's things that they brought to the table. And I just feel like when Perlman came in and with that corporate raider mentality, it really started to take its toll. And I think eventually it really did break his heart. He died of a broken heart.
When it comes to a broken heart, of course, I think a lot of people of my age, and even Dan's age, will remember Heroes Reborn. Now, Heroes Reborn, for me, is the end of the Marvel Universe, and it's such a schism. I was just wondering, can you remember the first time that Mark heard about it? Did he say anything to you about the ramifications of that?
It wasn't good. I didn't. I just feel like he thought that a lot of decisions were being made. Sometimes he made this comment like, "Why don't we just publish X-Men? Because nothing else, seems to matter to them. They just want more X-Men. We're going to do more X-Men, X Factor, Excretion, Excrement." He would make everything else should just get. And at the same time, he's still going to keep doing it because he loves it. But it just, it was a very difficult time, and he had to put on so many, different guises to keep everybody happy, and trying to make all the employees happy. And then he had to fire them, and it was just he didn't really. He did not know. And, I think he wanted to probably start writing movies because he realized that the storyboard format of comics was very, very similar to screenwriting. And he was writing scripts all the time anyway, just in his head. The way he would turn in his work, it looked like a script. I was like, it was a treatment, so, but it was a very fascinating process, just saying how he, you would bring the story in, and then they would pencil it, and then the inker would ink it. And, it just went through all these permutations. And I think he loved the process of it so much that, it was starting to change though. And it really was starting to take its toll. I mean, I saw it. He was a little more depressed in the last, year. We had a long hallway between the parts of our apartment, and in the mornings he would come flying down there to say goodbye to me, because he would, come and kiss me every morning, and before he left. And that towards the end he would just like, kind of be sloughing down the hall going, ugh, I gotta go in here and see what I can do, and give him a line of happy horse shit. And
that's got to be so depressing for a guy that was such a rabid fan, and such a and all of a sudden you get to such levels, and then it doesn't become fun anymore, and all that passion, and it becomes a business, and then it's out of his control. He's got to do these things, right, and stuff, and it just you're surrounded, and you're in the industry that you love, but you got no control, and you have to do it a certain way that it's unhappy. That's very depressing. That's like being stuck, and it's like you're seeing the things, right, you love in front of your faces, but they're not your. I don't know. It's just they're so out of touch. It's right. Got to be, for somebody like him, it's got to be something that really hurt him.
Yeah. And he said, he lamented, he said, I just feel like I look what everybody else is doing, and I feel like I never made it to the mountaintop. And I actually said that during the Tribune, and Paul Levitt said to me, yes, but he built the mountains for other people to climb on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Catherine, I don't want to be, disrespectful in any way, but where were you when you found out that that he had passed? Were you there at the house? What was the situation?
Well, I had luckily we lived up in the country in Pauling, so we had 7 acres that we were on the Appalachian Trail. There was very few people around, and I said, Mark, do you realize that if anything happens up here, they're never going to find us? And he just kind of shrugged it off. He didn't really think it much mind. And it was after a particularly difficult couple weeks, and he snapped at me the night before, and I said, that's very unlike him, because he just was very stressed. I felt he was stressed, but he was happy that his sister and her family, his nieces and nephews, were coming for 2 weeks. So we had just started our 2-week vacation, and they were all coming up to the house. And that's exactly when heart attacks happen. After you have a very stressful time. And then the LDLs come, the HDL and the LDLs come in, and they just, they cause a heart attack. So that's what had happened. Monday morning, he was, I was getting up to go into the city because I had a couple bookings, and I was just trying to get a few extra minutes of sleep, and the cat's chewing on my hair, and I'm like, oh God, I'm not gonna be able to get my extra 20 winks in here. And then Mark starts thrashing around, and I'm like, oh my God. And I look over, and he's asphyxiating. And I jumped out of bed, and I was just like, oh my God, he went incontinent. I was like, he is not fooling around here. This is no prank. And I screamed, and Gail and Wendell were in the other room, and they came in. And by that time I had come back into the room, and he had sat up. And I think, there's the, kind of the last, energy you have in your body, whatever. And Gail said to me, I think he's dead. And I said, what? No, let's, we got to revive him. So we started, mouth to mouth resuscitation. And I tried to get the EMS to come, and we're in the middle of the woods, so I put my car in it was August. So I just put a raincoat on, and I ran out on the road to see if the EMS were coming. Cause I knew we didn't have cell phones in those days. There was no GPS or anything. So I figured I'd have to wave them in. But it was just so surrealistic. And Aaron kept coming out. I was his nephew, who now I had in my show, who looks like Captain America. I mean, he grew up to be this super soldier, and he was this little 5-year-old boy. He kept coming out of the bedroom saying, they're not really getting him to breathe, so it was very, very stressful for this little boy. And he remembers that. I talked to him about it when I saw him a couple months ago, and it was a very, very difficult time to understand what was happening. And then the EMS came, and it had been 20 minutes, and I said, oh my God, he's going to be completely brain dead. But we got in the car, and we were following the ambulance to the hospital. And I said to Wendell, his brother-in-law, I said, they're not going very fast because they don't need to. And, I was like, it was very, very far to the hospital. So, and then Wendell starts telling me he was worried about Mark's soul, because Mark was an atheist and agnostic, and Wendell was a born again Christian. And I said, Wendell, this is not the time.
Yeah.
This is some bad joke that Mark is playing on me here. It is not the time. We got to the hospital, and they came in and said, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. And I just, it was like the surrealistic moments. And I went back, I took off his wedding ring. I looked at him, and, I said, I'll do the best I can to keep your significance alive. Because he always said to me, I can't imagine not having a significant life. So I said, from that moment on, and the doctor said, even if we would had him on the operating table with his with his chest open and a defibrillator, we could not have saved him, because he's so young and healthy that your heart just blows up. It's like an engine, it blows up. You can't really replace it in a car. So that's kind of, it was absolutely, a massive myocardial infarction, massive heart attack. So that, and I went back home, and I opened up the will, and I said, oh my God, I have to get his organs. I have to get his organs donated as soon as I possibly can. So by that time, like hours go by. They can only take your skin and your cornea. And I'm thinking, okay. So and then the Undertaker's at the door, and it was and then everybody from Marvel was calling, because they had found out, and it just it was just one of those roller coaster rides that you're just in disbelief and shock. But that that was, and I think, I think that the book had come out. I think the Captain America had come out that he hadn't worked on, that a couple weeks before or something like that. So, I mean, he had so many, and his parents had, his mom had cancer, and his father was spiraling down with his Lyme's disease. And he made a comment that he said, I don't know what I'm going to do about my parents or Marvel. And he never complained. So when he said something like that, I don't know what I'm going to do about my parents or Marvel, I knew that something was up, because he was running out of ideas, and that was something he never ran out of. But that being said, he was still taking screenwriting classes, and everybody loved Mark, like Dan said, and he would have found his place. He wasn't super interested in video games or any of that. He wasn't going. I don't think he didn't like Sarah to play video games or anything. He didn't really like video games. So comics were really it. Movies were really it. So TV, that kind of thing, books. So, but yeah, that was kind of the story. I was there. It wasn't like I walked back in and he had passed away. I was there. And, it was, that's why very few things fluster me, because I've been to the bad news mountaintop. I saw, my husband pass away right in front of me, and nobody could save him. And I would have dreams afterwards, that I would be on Park Avenue and 27th Street, where Marvel's office were, and I could see Mark was on a tightrope between the buildings, and all the crowd was underneath him. And I was like, I have to get to him before he falls, and then he would fall, and so I was having these kind of dreams like that, just trying to save him dreams. But, I came to the realization that the one way that, you till death do you part with the comic book guy, not so much.
Wow.
And he left me the task of getting his ashes into a comic book. So Marvel and I did that, and we made sure that the ashes were put into the ink, and I was able to drive up to the plant in Connecticut with Elliot Brown, who chronicled it all, and we put him first into the Marvel Universe poster, and then Mark was like, no, that's not good enough. We're going to put him in Squadron Supreme. So I wrote the preface, and I put him into the ink, and then it sold. There was like 5,000 copies. It sold so quickly, and they said to me, we need some more ashes, and we're going to do another printing. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went to the warehouse. I could not find his ashes, nowhere. And I said, well, it's kind of dark and cold here. I don't think I'm not going to look around. And I told them that he probably, we wouldn't have any ashes to put into the next printings. And it's probably, I went back, and the ashes were right where I thought they were. So I don't know if he was hiding on me, or if it was like, but I mean, there were some strange things happening from beyond during those times. And I said I wouldn't put it past him, because now Dan and I created this thing called the Ashograph. So for his induction into the Hall of Fame, the Contest of Champions book dropped in July, and we bought 100 copies of it, and we created a cover that you saw, Steve, and it's a mold of his autograph, and it's a resin mold, and I sprinkle the ashes in it, and it hardens for about 3 days. We pop it out of the silicone mold, and it's a perfect autograph of Mark, and you can see the particles in there. It's creepy, cool, collectible, and controversial. And I was even thinking, we have to put a little finger that says, yep, he's in there, because it just was like, it was just like a weird joke, that And it was his final wish. And I said he threw himself into his work. He definitely threw himself into his work in more ways than one, literally. And so that kind of led me down the path of realizing that was my role, was to keep his MO
Legacy.
alive, his memory alive.
Mhm.
And
Now, of
be
course,
his legacy advocate.
when we spoke in New York, you did mention to me, and it was something that my ears just went up like this when you said it, that there is material that you have for maybe a third omniverse. Is that true?
There's material.
Yes, for a third magazine.
Yes,
Omniverse?
yes. Verse.
There is.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, how is that project coming along? Is that are we going to see that in 2023?
I hope. Don't you think, Dan?
Dan, do
2023. I hope so. I hope so. It's coming. The only problem with it is 2023 is right around the corner. So but yes, we are working on it. We're very excited. It's important to do it right. And we've started to talk to a lot of Mark's old friends and people who worked on the project with him. And again, it's one of the real, pleasures of dealing with all of this stuff is everybody's in on it. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody's, positive and upbeat and excited. So we're hoping to be able to get a reprint of the first 2 issues and then add the third. We're not quite sure how that will, what form it will take. Whether we release them as individuals or more likely we'll probably release them all as a package arrangement. And then we're optimistic that we're going to then go out and make an Omniverse 4 and really carry on the tradition of analysis. I'm a huge fan of that kind of stuff. I bet you guys are too. So that we're excited that there doesn't seem to be any shortage of people that are interested. I've already got people that are, they can't wait. They want to write this article. They want to write that article. They can't wait to do this, that, or the other thing. And, one of the things that we realized, with Mark's induction into the Hall of Fame, we've been really blessed to get out there and not just meet fans, but meet coworkers, meet people that really knew him and loved him. And he, as Catherine talked about before, he really took a lot of ownership of these people that he felt parentally and responsible, that he was an important part of Marvel and their operations, and that these were people that looked to him, which, those of us that are in positions like that know the kind of pressure that comes when, especially when you care about the people that are working for you or you're working with, to feel that pressure is can be very, very difficult. But so one of the things that Catherine and I whisper about a lot is we feel that one of the best ways we can honor Mark's legacy would be to be able to give those people opportunities to have more voice and to be more prominently seen and perhaps, remember some of the things that these people did. So we've been really lucky with that project as well. We've done a couple of panels that have been very well received. Our panel at New York Comic Con, we had panel crashers. We had 2 or 3 people that just showed up. They wanted to be on the panel. Very exciting, real who's who of Marvel bullpen people. And we didn't even get them all, that there were people who were supposed to come but didn't come, wanted to come but couldn't come. It just seems like there's a never-ending list of coworkers and conspirators and Marvel, Marvel comic legacy people who really want to be involved with these projects. So that'll be the next thing in terms of the Mark Gruenwald project. Is we'll get we're now done with the astrograph. At least it's manufactured now and seems to be selling quite well, and we're excited about that. So we'll move on to the Omniverse. We've got to, as I say, figure out what form it will take, but we're definitely going to get that third one printed. And then, as I said, we're hoping to build it out and make new ones and maybe create new stories and maybe find new exciting voices, but also always, reverent and remembering, because it's such a big part of the Mark Gruenwald Foundation to be able to offer these people. And there are, of course, a lot of big name people as well who are less needing the help, but have so far been very interested. that we really have been very lucky. I like I said, and then Kat can echo this. I think is I don't think anybody's blown us off. You know that everybody's into it. Everybody wants to do it. So,
I also have his calendars that he wrote in a calendar every
Right.
single 1978. So I have the history of what happened when, and I think that would be a good thing to transcribe. A few of like
That'd be amazing.
Mark's remarks.
Yeah.
Mark's, yes. A publication of Mark's remarks, which is an amazing record of his thoughts at the time. It's a timepiece.
Yeah.
And that is definitely, I think that's essential. It's essential.
Yeah. I'd buy it.
And the calendar,
Oh,
the
definitely.
calendars are even more Mark's remarks. They're remarkable, really. That they each day has an entry, and for the most part, it's fascinating stuff. But what movie he watched, what TV show he saw, whatever it was. And there are, of course, some very exciting ones where met with Stan Lee today. That kind of stuff. Just got the job at Marvel, and so it's really quite remarkable, and it does go to show that this was a thinker. This was a person who had a real sense of documentation of all of that. That it's incredibly well preserved.
He was, he had a running calendar of how many days he was alive. He wrote his calendar. Quite an archival sense of purpose, and I think and the thing is, I don't have ideas from his scripts or things like that. I just know he was going to let it pour out of him when the time came, and it just unfortunately he would have if he would have kept those kind of notes, I probably would have had some things that continuing stories that he had in his craw. But the thing is his legacy advocate. I keep the way he operated alive, the way he the like you were saying, the historical impact that he had, the influence that he had, and there are very few people who wrote in a short amount of time. I had to buy, one of the directives in the will was I had to bind his books and give them to the library. They were an arm's length long, guys. He wrote an arm's length of work, bound work in 43, So the man was prolific, and I think. And maybe he was so fast paced because he knew that he wasn't really gonna, be around. I don't know, but
It's funny how that works out, though. That like he put out that much. It's almost like the Jimi Hendrix thing. Like you put out all this incredible stuff.
Right.
He doesn't know if he's going, but like it's almost storybook. It's almost storybook to have that stuff. Now I know we got to
Jimi
wind
Hendrix
down.
would have had to engineer hundreds of other albums on top of having that kind of to do what Mark did, just to put a capper on it. This is that Mark, you understand, while he was writing that arm's length worth of books, was also editing 2/3 of Marvel's comics, and in fact doing things in the background that aren't even really, that aren't even as easy to explain as all of that.
Right.
So he was not just writing.
Right. Well, it comes down to his passion, like his love for it, and it's like, and that's why he gave his all to it, and that's why we love him, and that's why on our podcast we celebrate these sometimes forgotten names. And to be honest, Mark is not a name that's so in the limelight, other than to a lot of the more of the hardcore readers. But it's this. You see his sprinkle on so many things, but that's why we do this, is that we want to get people to know these people, to go back to the David Anthony Crafts, to the Steve Gerbers, like a lot of these guys, Rick Holbergs, like people that have impacted lives, and we want to celebrate them. And that's what we do here. And I love Mark. I'll tell you before I give it to Niall to give our last words here. I'll never forget when I was a little kid, and my uncle owned like a little variety store. And this is what me and baby Steve over here, baby Thanos Steve, can agree on. We have so many things in common, but that Marvel Universe, I'll never forget. They had the little comic books in that variety store, and I remember seeing the Marvel Universe, and I'm like, what is that? I remember getting that copy. I didn't have to pay because it was my uncle, so it was great to save a couple cents. So I ran to the tennis court. I sat down and I opened up this thing, and I was like, I'm an OCD guy, so I need things like in order and categorized and stuff. And I love like those role-playing games, exactly what you said, Dan. But I'll never forget a little 7-year-old little Hispanic Italian kid was going, what? It was all that stuff I wanted to see. It was all situated like I need to be told that stuff, and I need to see it because I love stats and all that stuff. And seeing that for the first time, it blew me away. And when I met Steve over here, we have so many similarities, and the Marvel Universe is one of the big things so he'll always be imprinted on me. And so it's a celebration it's an honor to be talking to you two because you guys are keeping his name alive. And I'm here to just help you scream that out there, and I'll do whatever I can to help that go and to help that. And I know Steve will and Niall do. And that's what we do. We celebrate him because he is a legend and he's done so much, and people need to know that. And that's what we do. So Niall, on some last words for Catherine and Dan?
Yeah, I would love to, for 27 years, you've been a legacy advocate for him. And that has to be a daunting task at times. Has there been challenges that you guys have had to deal with, trying to keep the memory alive or even putting out new material?
I think finding the projects that are authentic, that really resonate with what he would want to have accomplished is kind of what Dan and I have. One of the things that's you don't ever want to do anything that smacks of commercial or anything that's just, oh, let's just do this to do it. It has to have a well thought out Gruenwald approach. And, having lived with him and know how he thought, I want to keep those projects that harken back to little things that he would say to me, about, comics and fashion are so interrelated. So now we're doing Cosmoda. Comic-Con had a baby with Fashion Week, just because Mark used to come to my shows and say how important fashion was to comics. And so everything is an homage to his way of thinking and a way of operating throughout his life. And I think the Ashraf is, a testament to him and his final wishes. I didn't think up the thing I wanted to throw, his ashes into Squadron Supreme. It all evolved because of Mark's wish to become one with the fans and give a piece of himself to everyone in a very real way. So I think creating those projects that are authentic, if we keep this up and we can keep his memory going, I don't think I'm going to have too much, problem with having to have somebody say Mark who. So
Right.
that's one of the things that I'm grateful for is that, it's almost like talking about, caviar or something like that. It's like the finest thing you could talk about to somebody who's a true fan. They light up, their eyes light up. They tell me a story that they had about him or something that he did that was so mind-blowing, like you saying. He would have loved to have, he put himself in the fans. I know the fans are going to love this. And he answered every fan. He had a translator who translated his letters that were coming in from Italy. He answered every fan letter too.
Yeah.
Because he got in letters of the editor. He said, I knew when I saw my letter to the editor in that, in Stanley's column, that I was going to be a writer. so he said, I don't know who's gonna, be in my shoes like that and need that kind of encouragement. So I mean, he was constantly working. I mean, he slept, and then he was everything. He was doing stuff for Marvel, like Dan said. There's so many different categories you can't even imagine the guy he was on top of. To have to, and he did a lot of stuff for Sarah, his daughter. He would record television shows and get her into reading, and read the complete book of Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz. He just knew how to engage people and to excite them and to motivate them and to feel like they belonged in his life. And that's one of the things that I try and do with my business, is treat it like a bullpen, so everybody has a stake in the final outcome. And that's something I learned from him.
It's incredible.
And Steve, give us some last words, and you're going to get us out of here. So,
okay. I'm going to end with my one of the special moments of my life. I actually met Mark Gruenwald at the San Diego Comic Convention in 1995, and I walked up to his little table, and there was something that had happened in an issue of Quasar that I didn't agree with, and one of my favorite characters was Bybeast, and in the story, Bybeast had been beaten too easily, in my opinion. So I walked up to him and I was like, Mark, I said, I have a bone to pick with you. And he looked up at me and he gave me this little smile. And he goes, really? And I was like, that in Quasar 16, Bybeast would not be beaten like that. And he sat back on his chair and he went, the artist did that. I did not give him permission to do that. And I laughed. And it's a very, very, very special, that little smile he gave me, it's a very special thing. And it's one of the 3 special moments of my entire life in comic books. John Buscema, Steve Gerber, Mark Gruenwald. Those 3 moments to me are held up in. So I just wanted to express that. And I also wanted to say, Catherine, it is with all honor. And I am so thankful that you're there working, keeping that name alive. And it's just an amazing thing. It's an honor to speak to you and to get this firsthand information. And Dan, thank you so much. Obviously, you're a fan. Maybe just a little notch under me. It's okay. Just a little notch under me. But I really appreciate it. And I say, I really thank you.
And wait a second. And hold on. And Steve is only a few notches under me. So let's.
I don't want to get slap happy right now. Again, I wish you all.
We only do it for the fans, guys. We're only doing it for you. That's it.
I hope and pray
wouldn't be worth doing if not for guys like you, and that's for sure.
See your fruition and everything comes out. I'm looking forward to some more stuff, and I wish you all the greatest success.
Thanks,
all right,
guys.
Steve. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming on, guys.
Ball.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.